Hello? Yes? You don't say. Said our landfill was operating illegally. Looked into it? You're right. And so as a consequence, thanks to some citizens who were on the ball, people flying in the formation, we now set the pace for lining underground storage tanks and also landfills, because the landfill thing was very important. The landfill was being operated illegally with all sorts of things that I won't go into the details about, but could be examined by looking at the history in the local publication, because they covered that very well at the time. And then, early in 1985, a young woman comes before the commission with this mason jar full of amber-colored water, and she said, "This is the water we have to drink." 34th Street and Archer Road. I mean, it's right outside the city limits, right next to GRU's water mains, but they were on wells. Who on the commission will come help me discover the source of this problem and help us resolve it? Well, it fell on me again because I kind of volunteered. We walked in the neighborhoods. Everybody there had problems that were incredible. Deaths, birth defects, all sorts of tumors, dead pets, hair falling out. It was terrible. And this had been known by people who should have done something about the fact that they knew about it. Well, anyway, turned out this woman was Penny Wheat. Aha. So she was an obvious person who had kind of like the secondary path of appreciating the fact that the American ideals of justice and truth and that sort of thing. But when she got whacked, she came right to the front of the V and became a county commissioner herself and serves to this day admirably. And I don't think there's been a better margin of winning that's been held by any commissioner than her in some history of this community.
When you were on the county commission,
yes,
it was never easy. It was all you.
Well, that's the dynamic of government. And in fact, that's why you have an odd number of representatives on a body, is so that there can be always the settlement of the issue. One evening, for example, 2 commissioners were out of town. There were only 3 to govern the meeting. So we pulled out an agenda list of all sorts of progressive things that we wanted to put on the table, got them passed, and the next week when the others came back, those were all thrown off the table again. But it was the idea that now, 10 years later, all but one of those things have been approved and are now accepted as standard operating procedure. The one that still hasn't been adopted is to adopt Robert's Rules of Order. The City Commission, whenever time it convenes a newly elected commissioner, they swear them all in and acknowledge by vote that they will operate by Robert's Rules of Order. The Commission has the so-called Commission's Rules, the last of which says that if you break any of the others, it doesn't really matter. So the parliamentary procedure, perhaps the reflection on this sad current behavior of the lack of complete consistency with judicial and parliamentary process might be reflected on a historical fact that won a Pulitzer Prize for the man who wrote the story about it, one Buddy Davis, who got a Pulitzer Prize in 1969 for writing about the fact that Alachua County was the last county in America to be desegregated. So this sort of plantation residue of the rule by fiat rather than the rule by law, or the law that comes from fiat rather than well-considered justice, is an interesting reflection of our true history. And although we don't wear our bracelets in public, there is a certain amount of order that a residual plantation society tends to enforce effectively by one means or another. But anyway, so then from following the Jeffersonian dictum of serving and then going back to the land to live under the laws promulgated while on service call, there was an interesting observation, a group called Friends of Alachua County. Now, this had been stimulated by an editorial in the daily paper that was written in May of 1985. And the editorial suggested that what Florida needed was a group called Friends of Florida, because they were talking about the successful group called Friends of Oregon, which had been created a few years earlier to help administer in Oregon the comprehensive plan there and growth management strategies and environmental protection and energy management and those sorts of intelligent policies that you'd expect governments to follow to. Well, so this light went off in several people's heads and said, Friends of Oregon, Friends of Florida, Friends of Alachua County. I mean, if you want to create a big tent, why not create a tent that says Friends of Alachua County? And then everybody who was not a friend of Alachua County could go to the other tent. And who would raise their hand to say they weren't a friend of Alachua County? So, good mechanism. So then it was realized that with a change of the publishing board of the daily paper, the New York Times syndicate member, there was a definite change in '86 because that's when Penny Wheat got elected. And a special delegation of local development interests went to the chairman of the board of the New York Times in New York City and pleaded with them for a person to be sent to manage this local chain paper in a way which would not impede the objectives of the, let's say, the development interests, those who would transform this community in a way which was a little faster they would wish and a little more to their benefit, because numbers was the game and they wanted more numbers, more residents, more sales, more this, more that, and of course that plays right in the hand of much of commercial journalism because that's basically how the freight's paid. So there was a sea change in the New York Times syndicate paper called the Gainesville Sun, and as a consequence the so-called hammering began. It was a very famous phrase, and all sorts of plots and schemes and interesting activities, some of which got exposed. Chambergate was most interesting, where one of the little mice inside one of the other little nests decided to go public with what was known about the relationships between the president of the Chamber of Commerce and the president of the University of Florida to close down, to cut off discussions by certain university professors in the public domain of Alachua County's development policies, and to also focus most viciously on some of the behaviors and activities of some of the elected officials. And this was done in a very conspiratorial setting, which is also well history documented. So these sorts of things were quite interesting. People who had been Democrats all their life, like the county sheriff, changed parties. Special PACs were created to try and draw the groups, you know, to this great fray. And I suppose that many of us who graduated as a result of those investments to civilian life again were pleased that we didn't live in a more southern government, because we might have woken up and disappeared one day. But in any case, so then Friends of Alachua County decided to build a newspaper, because it was realized that unless you buy ink by the barrel, you probably don't have much opportunity to express yourself. Writing letters to the editor once a month is not exactly the most effective medium of communication when those letters are subject to editing. So Friends of Alachua County Talk, Fact, was created. And there have been publications called Fact before. But it's been published now almost for 10 years and represents, along with other local publications, Iguana, Moon, and so forth, an interesting aspect of Alachua County, which I'm told has a greater number for its population of locally based communication media than any other community in America, and these little publications still exist. I mean, there's been a rise and fall throughout the country of little communication efforts from the grassroots, but these remain. Now, there are electronic versions of many of these media forms that I mentioned. Interesting. So now we're into the 90s. We're almost into the next century. And we're doing this project now called Leadership 21, which is basically the little red hen. Now, that's another little childhood metaphor which I think many people can reflect on and remember, that when the little red hen was looking about in her community for people to help her do this and do that, she asked everybody, and not everybody wanted to play, but she did it herself because it was worth doing. And in the end, of course, she decides to feed her chicks with the bread she's baked. Maybe we'll open the story up a bit at that point, as I was suggesting earlier, that everyone in the community can feed off the planting efforts and the baking efforts of the little red hen. So we're looking now to this citizenship training mechanism, because there is a process which I have experienced, which many people have experienced, which even more people have observed, that there is this evolution, if one is conscious, of the mechanism of growth as a citizen. And this growth as a citizen is wonderful, because in America we have these grand principles to which we can adhere, to which we can admire the proponents and the precedents of, and we can conduct our own flavor. It's like the chicken soup for the community. We can build our own recipes, our own Foxfire books, and so on. So right now for the last 2 or 3 months, we've been assembling recipes from people in the community. And is it wonderful? I've made 200 phone calls. 100 letters have gone out. We're starting to get a flood now of these recipes. One-page brief summaries of successful projects conducted by people in this community in a very short summary format, and at the bottom it says, for further information, and da-da-da. Now this will go in a loose-leaf ring binder cookbook, and we will use this as one of the main teaching medium for a class which is being offered in the fall B term of Santa Fe Community College called Citizen as Leader. And the object will be, over a very short period of time, to imbue those persons interested in becoming more effective activists, the mechanism of that activism, and based not on some academic theoretical ideology or somewhere else, but what really took place here. The fact, for example, that the 4 or 5 year-long project to encourage General Electric to disconnect its atomic weapons program from its appliance program, basically to get out of nuclear weapons. The major force in the project that was done worldwide, turns out by the people in California who began the program, Gainesville, Florida. There was the net ban amendment. There was the interesting amendment called Save Our Homes, which was a constitutional amendment to the state of Florida, which was basically to limit the rate of property tax increase to no more than 3% a year, because many homestead people were losing their land, if they lived on a lake especially, because people with lots of money could come bid up the price of their land, and the property appraiser would say, neighbor's land $3 million, your land $3 million, can't pay tax, too bad. So that Saving Our Homes was another measure that passed, in part due to work here in this community. Lots of things have happened. Cassini flyby, you know, the vehicle crashed when it went too close to Mars. The plutonium-powered vehicle that took its gravity slingshot by Earth to go off to Jupiter, well, there was enough effort globally, led by people in Gainesville, to make JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, adjust the trajectory altitude above the Earth from 300 miles to 700 miles. Pretty cosmic, but at least it doubled the chances of getting a plutonium dust-off, which could have had consequences to the populations. So the idea is that somebody can do things. You don't have to be anointed necessarily. You have to have experience. You have to have a sort of a preconception, a vision, or you can wait and get whacked by reality to come into the V, or to struggle up toward the V. But I think the Jeffersonian approach is better, the de Tocqueville approach, the knowledge, the sense of history, the roadmap, the knowledge of place, the spirit of the place, the energy, the tremendous unique energy that every place holds, the magic of place, the sacred qualities of place. These are the things that, for those who are aware of them, of those qualities, and no judgment about those who may be more or less aware. This is just the reality. In the stream there's gravel and there's nuggets. This leadership program is sifting for the nuggets, because we think that with more nuggets, you know, maybe better leadership, maybe better examples, and this can be contagious. So there are many groups in the community who, for various reasons, are assembling their tribes, assembling their V formations, and taking turns in seeing who can sustain the lead of the V, because it's not that they're going to stay there. It's a tiring position. And as long as there's others in the V, we have, the leadership has those to fall back on, and people take their turn in being the leadership between the high and the low. The precincts, there are 53 precincts in Alachua County, and not a single one of them has a monthly meeting. And at the year 2000, when we elect a president, every precinct in Alachua County, along with all other counties in America, all 3,000 of them, can elect almost 500 precinct representatives to represent in this pyramid between the 5 county school board and city commissioners and the huge base of nearly 200,000 people, a middle transmission body, the 500 precinct representatives, who could come forward and speak with legitimacy and logic about measures that affected our multi-million-dollar budgets. Every precinct taxed over $10 million times 53, big numbers. Where's the money going? Staff and consultants and special interests pull the string. So I think this idea of participatory democracy has more relevance than ever before. Economic democracy is as important as political democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.